Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Hello everyone, welcome! I am so excited to be filming a video for you all. I missed you. So, today I have my April reading wrap-up. I read 14 books in the month of April, and that is definitely less than I usually read. I usually read around 20. So, things were hectic, things were busy in April, and yeah, I didn't make the content I wanted, I didn't read as much as I wanted, but here we are, we're gonna wrap up all these books and talk about them, and let's just go ahead and get started. So, the first book that I read in April is Reckless by Amanda Quick. This is a historical romance, and this is the first full Amanda Quick book that I have ever read. I had started some of her books, but couldn't find them on audio, so wasn't able to finish them. This book was a ride, let me just tell you. I think that when a lot of people talk about Amanda Quick, they comment on how well plotted her books are, and I think that's exactly what was happening here. She really is a master of plot in that each thing that happens in the story leads to something else happening and something else happening. Like, it's not just a series of random events thrown in here, like they all connect and they all lead you to the end plot point of the whole book. This had a heavy adventure aspect to it. It had a little bit of like almost Indiana Jones vibes, I felt like. It did have a very angsty, sort of steamy romance, and I do have a full reading vlog devoted to this book because I had a lot of things to say about it. But basically the premise of this is we have our heroine who needs some help. She needs a hero to go on a quest for her, and so she encounters this man who she believes to be, you know, sort of a roguish man on the outside, but have like a heart of gold, a chivalrous heart of gold on the inside, so she ends up getting him to go on this quest for her and accomplish what she needs to happen. And he starts out by being very attracted to her, like he has this very strong attraction to her right from the beginning, and as they are sort of find themselves being entwined with one another, they end up getting married, and she believes that he loves her and that this desire that he has for her is a way of him expressing his love for her, while he adamantly denies that he loves her and he just lusts after her and just wants to have her in his bed. And it was a very interesting development of their relationship. I really, really enjoyed watching Amanda Quick develop this relationship, go through some pretty emotional things as they're trying to work things out, and this big dummy of a hero who's convinced he doesn't love this woman, but literally, totally he does. And having him realize that in the end, it was fun. It was a fun read. It wasn't perfect, but it was very fun. I really enjoyed it. 4 out of 5 stars, and definitely want to read more from Amanda Quick because I was very impressed with this. Okay, the next book that I read is Rebel by Beverly Jenkins. This is the first book in her Women Who Dare series, but this is also a spin-off of her Levesque family series because the hero in this book is a Levesque, and he is also a relative of Galen from Indigo. So I adored this book. This book was beautiful. It was very, like, emotion-stirring, I feel like Beverly Jenkins does such an excellent job of playing with your emotions and getting you to feel things that you should feel in her stories without it ever feeling heavy-handed or, you know, like she's banging you on the head with a pot or whatever. Like, she is a master at drawing emotions from you, and I just loved this so much. Once again, we have a very strong, independent heroine who is working to rebuild a settlement, basically, for emancipated slaves, and she's a school teacher. So one day, some thugs, basically white supremacists, come and burn her school to the ground, and she is absolutely devastated. She does end up escaping, but the hero comes along and saves her, and he is immediately captivated by her. And I think this is something that Beverly Jenkins does very often, and we have a very independent heroine who doesn't really want to admit to love, doesn't want to fall in love, doesn't believe in love, and then we have this hero who immediately sees her and not only is desiring her and lusting after her, but also really wants to make her his woman, and I just loved that so much. I loved the gallantry of this hero. I loved the emotional parts of this story. This definitely, I would say, has a lot of trigger warnings for some very heartbreaking, terrible deaths that happened to Black people in this book, and it was at times really hard to read, but I think overall Beverly Jenkins balances that so well with an overwhelmingly happily ever after for this couple. It was just beautiful. I loved seeing the sparks of joy as they're living their everyday life, and I felt like this was a very powerful beginning to the series. I enjoyed it immensely. It was a 5-star read for me. Okay, the next book that I read is When He Was Wicked. This is part of the Bridgerton series. This is Francesca Francesca. This is my favorite book in the series so far. I gave this book 5 stars. I loved it. I felt like it was angsty and emotional and romantic, and it was just perfection. I loved seeing the couples from the other books, seeing the other Bridgerton siblings who have been married off. I loved Francesca and how just the overwhelming love that poured out of the pages of this book, and this is definitely like, it's not a second chance romance, but it is a widow romance. She did love her husband. He dies early on in the beginning, and she's left as a widow, and it's actually his cousin who inherits the title, and he has loved Francesca for so long, and it is their romance together. This book was so angsty for Julia Quinn, and it was so beautiful and romantic, and I just loved it so much. I thought it was perfect. So 5 stars for this one. Really, really enjoyed it. Okay, the next book that I read is Parks and Provocation by Juliet Cross. I received an ARC of this book, and let me just tell you, so before I received an ARC of this book, I actually had pre-ordered it because I love Juliet Cross. This is her first contemporary romance, and I was dying to read it. And this book did not disappoint me at all. I gave this book 5 stars. This is swoony, this is sexy, this is steamy, this is funny. This book just made me so happy as I was reading it. Honestly, if you're looking for a pick-me-up read, something to just make you feel good and happy, I cannot recommend this highly enough. It was so fun. It was so romantic. I love the way Juliet shows her couples falling in love from the beginning, sort of flirtations and acknowledging how attracted they are to one another as that relationship develops. I think that she does that so, so well. This had great banter. It was just a really fun plot. We have our hero and heroine who basically were kind of high school sweethearts, kind of, but they had some things happen that pit them against each other, but there were definitely feelings there in high school. Years and years pass, they end up meeting they end up meeting again in the future when the heroine comes back to her hometown. And they hit it off. And the heroine actually is the co-host of a podcast that is all about like talking about the dates that they go on, how it went, they rate it, they talk about if this was a good first date or not. Like, it's a really fun aspect of it. And so she accepts a date from this man who she kind of has a little bit of hard feelings towards because of what happened in high school, all the while thinking that she's going to use him as a podcast guest. And he, meanwhile, is thinking he's just going to wow her and win her over and reclaim her despite everything that happened in high school. And it's just so fun. It was honestly just a complete mood booster. I loved it. If you want a good rom-com that's also very steamy, heartwarming, flirtatious, like, pick this one up. It was a really good time. All right, now we have my most hated book of all time ready. I have a vlog dedicated to this book specifically, and let me pull up my Goodreads review so I can read you off all of the trigger warnings that I noticed in this book. If you feel like trigger warnings are spoilers and you have an interest in reading this book, then, you know, mute me for a minute because I'm going to be talking about all of the trigger warnings in here, okay? Death of a parent, cancer, child abuse, child molestation, emotional abuse, death of a child on page, cheating, surprise pregnancy. So I gave this book 1 star. I hated it so bad, and not just because of what happened in the final plot point of the book, although I also really, really hated that. The problem that I had with this book, this is a contemporary romance. It's basically an age gap romance. It's a single dad and the heroine who is way, way, way young, and boy, does it show. She reads as extremely immature. They did not seem to really mesh well for me at all. We have this older man who has a son who is supposed to be really, like, responsible, and he hires her to be his nanny for the kid, and she seems like so immature. Like, they just did not mesh well for me at all. It felt icky in that way because I just did not see these two having a relationship when she was so clearly so much more immature than him. But that's basically the romance. There really isn't a plot until you get to the end and the thing happens, which I can't even talk about it. But one of the reasons I gave this 1 star, probably the biggest reason, is because of how heavy-handed this book is with every single traumatic situation you could possibly think of just being thrown in here. That is lazy writing, that is not good storytelling, that does not create emotion other than by force because the writing doesn't draw it out of you alone. She's just throwing these huge events that absolutely will create an emotional reaction in you. But does that mean it's a good story? No, it doesn't. This has kitchen sink level of trauma included in it for absolutely no good reason. It doesn't advance the story further. It doesn't really develop the characters at all because they are paper thin, let me just tell you. This was was lazily written. It was not plotted at all. There was no emotion in here. It was just a hot mess, and 1 star. Cannot stand this book. Do not recommend. Period. Ever. I hated it so bad. And on to happier things. The next book that I read is Romancing the Duke by Tessa Dare. I adored this book. I think this is historical romance perfection. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was so fun. It was the serotonin boost that I needed after reading that trash of a book before. It was just such a good time. I loved it so much. So basically we have in this book our heroine, who is the daughter of an author. Her father dies, leaving her a castle as her inheritance, but the castle is actually owned by a duke who is heavily scarred and also blind, and it was just beautiful watching their romance develop. I loved, loved, loved how the chemistry and attraction was developed in here, especially because the hero couldn't see her, but he was still so attracted to her. Oh, I just loved it so much. I felt like this was just a perfect grumpy sunshine historical romance. If you want to get started with historical romances, I would highly recommend this book. I think it was just perfectly done. 5 out of 5 stars. Loved every freaking page of it. And then the next book that I read is the second book in that series, Say Yes to the Marquess by Tessa Dare. Obviously, this is book 2 in the Castles Ever After series, so it follows the same plot line where the heroine inherits a castle. She's engaged to the Marquess, has been engaged for many years, and she is at the point where she's like, you know what? I've got this castle I've inherited, and I don't really want to marry this guy anymore. He's been putting me off for years and years. He clearly doesn't love me, so I'm just going to break the engagement and go live my own happy little life all by myself. However, the Marquess's brother, who is the hero and the love interest of our heroine, is like, no, 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 you can't do that. You need to marry my brother, and I'm going to try and convince you how to do that. So the plot of the whole book is basically him trying to convince her to marry his brother. But of course, these two aren't going to fall in love, right? And they absolutely did. So I think that this was such a fun book. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. It didn't quite measure up to the 5-star read of Romancing the Duke, but it was still a really fun time. I loved how the heroine was plus size in here. I thought this was perfect representation of a plus size heroine. Sadly, the cover does not reflect that. But I loved how the hero just absolutely was just infatuated with her and adored her, and how he loved watching her eat cake. The sounds as she ate cake, the sounds she made as she ate the cake was just so fun. I loved this book. It was a very good time. 4 out of 5 stars. Really highly recommend this one too. Okay, the next book that I read is Topaz by Beverly Jenkins. This was our Rake Appreciation Society pick for April, and I loved this one too. Beverly Jenkins, she's just a favorite author of mine. I find her books to be, even though they deal with some very sensitive and possibly triggering themes, I find her writing and her characterization, and specifically the romance, to be so comforting to me. I love how she creates chemistry. I think that's something she does so well, is just from the moment the characters meet, they have so much chemistry, and it's just so fun to read about. I love it so much. In this book, we have a reporter heroine who's trying to bring some evil man who is trying to prey on elder black people. She's trying to bring him to justice unknowingly, and she finds herself in a bit of a bind, and her father has also gotten himself in a bind and ends up saying, okay, I can't pay my debts to this black Seminole man who is our hero, so what I'm gonna do is offer you my daughter instead and you can marry her. And our hero is like, okay, sure. And from the moment they meet, they have such great chemistry. This book was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. It did have some slow parts. It did have a little bit of a mustache twirly ending with a villain there, but I still just really enjoyed it. So this is probably more of a 4.5 star, but I rated it 5 stars because I just love Beverly Jenkins so much and enjoy her books immensely. Okay, and the next book that I read is In Bed with the Devil by Lorraine Heath. This is the first book in her Scoundrel of St. James series, and I also really, really enjoyed this and gave this book 5 stars. I loved it. I think this has such a clever setup. I really loved that it's sort of like a little reminiscent of Oliver Twist, like we have a gang of, you know, orphans and ruffians like that, and some names even, and Fagin and Jack. It was just really, really fun. I really liked that aspect of it. But I really loved the romance in here. I felt like it was very, very steamy and a little bit angsty and a little bit piney too, from the hero's point of view. Even though he actually felt he was in love with another woman, he really pined for the heroine, even if at times he felt like it was mostly like a physical pining, like he still really, really wanted her. So I loved it. I love the bargain that they had. The basic plot of this is our heroine, someone is very dear to her, is in danger by her husband, and so she hires this man, the Devil Earl, and asks him, well, she doesn't really hire him. She enters into a bargain with him where she's like, hey, I really need you to unalive this guy. He's gonna hurt my friend, possibly kill her. And can you do that for me? And he's like, you know what? Yes, I can. However, he believes himself to be in love with a woman who is not of the social standing that he needs her to be in order to marry well. And so he says, I need you to teach this woman who I think I love, he doesn't really love her, to be a lady, and we'll just have a deal like that. I'll unalive this guy for you. You teach her how to be a lady and a proper wife, and we'll be good. And of course, they're not going to fall in love, and of course they do, and it was just so good. There wasn't any bit of a love triangle in here because the woman that he believes himself to be in love with loves him like a friend, so there's no love triangle in there, but it was enough tension and angst to sort of keep you guessing about what was going to happen with the romance, and I really, really loved watching the hero realize that he didn't actually love this woman he thought he did. He loved the heroine, and it was just really well done. I had a great time with this, 5 stars. Okay, now we are getting into some books that I just recently read and freaking loved. So the first one is The Longing of Lone Wolves. So this is an adult fantasy romance, and it has a post-apocalyptic setting. Basically what has happened is the humans created this end of the world type of event where they were kind of all wiped out basically, and now the Fae and the Fae Guardians are who is ruling the earth, and they consider humans to be a big danger, and so they are trying to eliminate all of them that they possibly can. And our book opens when our heroine was sort of like put to sleep in a way, frozen in a way, when the end of the world happened, and she ends up waking up far into the future in this world that is so very different from the one that she, you know, lived in. And our hero ends up seeing her. Now, the hero is a Fae Guardian, and he has a curse placed on him where no one can see him or hear him, so he is just basically walking the earth alone, and he's very, very lonely. And he sees our heroine, she's getting accosted by a group of Fae men who have bad intentions towards her, and he notices that the heroine can see him, and she's asking him for help, and nobody knows who she's talking to because he can't be seen. So he is so shook that she can see him that he obviously goes and rescues her, and from the moment that he carries her in his arms to like whisk her away to safety, he recognizes something about her that his soul is calling out to. So there's a fated mates element to this as well. And I really, really loved how that played into this, how he had this great desire to protect her and provide for her, and how there was a line in here that described how right it felt to be protecting her and how much he had missed having someone to love and care for, and oh, it was just so beautiful. The way this hero was so protective of her, I adored it. I really liked this fantasy world. I thought it was very unique. The fantasy in this book was a little bit broad. I wish it had been a little bit more narrow and we could focus more on the romance of the couple. It was steamy, there was a big focus on the romance, but I just obviously wanted more because I loved them so much. And I think a lot of times with first books in a fantasy romance series that can kind of happen, where the world building tends to take center stage because the author is preparing for future books to come. But I gave this book 5 stars. I wavered back and forth on, is it a 4-star, is it a 5-star? And I finally landed on 5 stars because I loved this couple. I thought this book was very unique. I just honestly had a great time reading it. So if you're looking for a new fantasy romance, then I would recommend this book because I adored it. I thought it was a fun time. I mean, obviously it's not perfect, you know, and I feel like I'm pretty picky about my fantasy romance, so, you know, that's why I kind of wavered, like, is it a 5, is it a 4? It's not perfect, but overall, like, I just enjoyed it so much. I loved their romance. I loved the concept that I gave it 5 stars. So if you want to try some new fantasy romance, adult, pick this one up. It was great. Which then, of course, I read the second book in the series. So the second book is called The Solace of Sharp Claws. And this book was very good as well. I gave this one 4 stars. I didn't quite love this couple as much as the first book. I do, however, feel like the world building was more narrow and more honed in on our couple, but I didn't quite love them as much as the first one. This one definitely has a Grumpy Sunshine vibe to it, and the plot in this is basically, this is a couple with an arranged marriage, and they have a fated mate bond, but they don't feel in love. They just feel pulled to be together in the beginning, and you have to get to watch that grow and develop into love. So this was really good. It was a great installment. Again, like, this series to me is very addicting, very readable. Like, I can get through one of these books in a day. I just really, really loved it. They're on audio with dual narration, and the narrating of the first book specifically is fantastic, and that's how I was able to get through it so fast. But I really enjoyed the series. I can't wait to read more from this author, and I think that she has potential to be a new favorite of mine because I'm just really impressed with these two books so far. Okay, and then I read Crown of Midnight, which was a reread for me. I am a huge fan of Sarah J. Maas and the Throne of Glass series. It's one of my favorite YA series to this day. I just adore it. I think she's an excellent storyteller and just loved it. I originally gave this book 5 stars, and upon reread, I think it's probably closer to a 4-star. This is the second book in a series. It's a high fantasy series with, basically, we have our heroine who is an assassin who was in this brutal prison where she's rescued to come and be the king's champion for this land, and as she is there, things start to unfold that results in this entire series. She's not who it appears. You know, this plot isn't what it appears to be. It's much grander, much bigger, and it's just a really great time, and I really loved it. So I kept my Goodreads rating at 5 stars just for nostalgia because that was originally what I rated it as, but upon reread I think it's probably a 4-star, but still a really good time reading it. And then we are also, I read that because of the read-along that we're doing that Jen from the Book Refuge is hosting, and we had our live show for that book on her channel last Saturday. So go check that out if you want to hear us discuss it more in depth, or if you want to join in with our read along with this, because in May we are actually starting Heir of Fire, and then we're going to be starting the A Court of Thorns and Roses, which that live show will be here on my channel. So we also read the short story of The Assassin and the Healer. It's the shortest one in here. I think Jen said it's like 45 pages, and I really loved that one as well. I gave that one 4 stars. It's a fun story. Basically, the assassin, Selena Sardathian, ends up meeting a healer, teaches her how to fight and be a baddie, and it was just a good time. So 4 stars for that one. Okay, and then the last book that I read, which is quite possibly one of my favorite books I have read this year, possibly my favorite for the month. I honestly adored this book so much, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and it is The Tyrant Alpha's Rejected Mate by Kate C. Wells. So that's quite a mouthful of a title, and I really was not prepared to love this book as much as I did, but wow. Did I ever love this? This is a rejected mate, fated mate book. It's a werewolf romance. I really, really love how realistic, I was gonna say realistic, and then when I thought it in my head, I'm like, can a werewolf story be realistic? But like, if I'm envisioning werewolves, this is how I envisioned they would actually behave and live. It felt realistic in that way, even though obviously it's not. It still felt like close to reality, so it was like so easy for me to suspend my disbelief, because I'm just like, yeah, that's exactly how I think that would happen. But we have our heroine who has a very damaged leg where she walks with a limp. She was in an injury, so she has a disability, and she is considered to be weak in the pack, and she's one of the lone females, and our hero is one of the strongest alphas there have ever been. And one day she recognizes this pull. It just sort of comes into place that he, the alpha, is her fated mate. And so she kind of claims him in a public setting, and he rejects her. And y'all, if you love a hero who grovels, you have got to read this book, because the way that he hurt her so publicly was devastating. But watching him grovel and win her back was a thing of beauty. I loved this book. It was so addicting. I couldn't put it down towards the end. It was just fantastic. Honestly, one of my favorite werewolf books I've ever read. Probably the best grovel that I've ever read. Just a really good time. So 5 out of 5 stars for that one. Enjoyed it a heckin' ton. It was a great time. So, alright, there you have it. Those are the books that I read in April. Thank you so much for watching this video, my friends. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have made it this far, please feel free to leave me a yellow heart. And yeah, I'll see y'all in my next video.